Hello everyone and welcome to my channel, and today I'm going to be continuing on my Black Templar commission, which I now realize I did not take an opening shot for the video. Well, I'm going to be painting 15 Black Templar Terminators, mostly close combat weapons and a few ranged weapons. And however, if you remember from that last video, the models were pre-textured with like a sand that covered everything and obscured a lot of the detail. Well, I found a way to remove it, mostly. I soak them in 91% isopropyl alcohol for around an hour minimum, sometimes overnight because I forgot about them. And then I use a Dremel drill tool with a brush wheel, and then I just brush it over, and it removes the sand particles. But there's a strange effect that happens. It looks like it sort of like an acid eats away a little bit at the plastic, and there's some parts that seem to be still textured. And now, after spending many hours of removing the texture, we're now going to put it back on. We're going to use Liquitex modeling putty, and we're going to take it with a paintbrush and we're just going to apply it, tap it on everywhere. You can also use a little sponge to flatten it, but I decided to just stick to the brush for right now and just apply it in small patches. It just was faster. And once we apply it in most places, we're just going to apply it to the armor. We're not going to apply it to the face or any of the helmets because the details there are so tiny and few that applying the paste will obscure it. We'll then take a razor knife or stuff and use it to dig out the putty from the folds or in the crevices and stuff so they stand out. We'll also use a brush with water to sort of sand smooth any of the putty that gets in the way of the aquila or any symbols and stuff, because we don't want those. We want this texturing to be in very specific places and not to obscure other certain details. And once that is done and fully dried, we're then going to take, I found that the Dremel brush thing actually works pretty well, and I use it to smooth it out. So there are some parts of the putty that's a little too thick, and this evens it out. And so it is, the texture that's left is small, noticeable little bumps, basically. And now once all that is done, we're going to use Bright Touch General Purpose Gray Car Primer. Now, one thing to note, these models have already been primed and they have been slightly sanded overall in the process, and that has dulled some of the detail a bit on some of the pieces. There's clearly some special Black Templar sprue bits on them, and the only problem is that with all these layers of paint, it obscures a little bit of the detail, so I kind of have to eyeball it to paint some of these things. I have to guesstimate to get them right. And then we're going to start off with Lead Belcher as our base color. However, I have now realized that for some reason my lead belches are very old, and so this color really doesn't exist. The lead belcher I use, I got one of the new lead belches and it is far darker. So I'm going to recommend Iron Warriors or Iron Hands, like a dark but still bright silver. And I completely forgot to add the paints that I use for this. So basically what I do is I take Abaddon Black and I mix it with Nuln Oil and a little bit of water. So basically equal parts Abaddon, Nuln, and water, and then I just apply it all over. And this creates a semi-transparent wash, blackish brown wash that obscures but still shows off all the detail. And then I go back to Lead Belcher and I do a light dry brushing all over to pick out the details and raised areas. We don't want to do a heavy dry brushing, we just want the metal to show through. And now with Ulthuan Grey and Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to paint all the shoulder pads. We're going to start out with Ulthuan Grey, and then we're just going to cover up everything with Pallid Witch Flesh. Ulthuan Grey is a very strong color that can cover black or metallics easy. So it's a good foundation for any whites. And I'm not going pure white because it's so transparent and terrible, so I'll use an off-white like Pallid Witch Flesh. It's good enough. And now with Steel Legion Drab, Agrax Earthshade, and Baneblade Brown, we're going to do the Purity Seals and the cloths. We'll start off with a layer of Steel Legion Drab. And I forgot to get footage of me pouring on Agrax Earthshade, but I apply Agrax Earthshade, and then I go back to Steel Legion Drab and highlight everything. I cover around 90 to 95% of all the seals and the loincloths with Steel Legion Drab again, and then I do a high contrast Baneblade Brown on just all the edges and the raised areas of the folds and the parts of the cloth, like covering like 70 to 80% of it. Now with Corn Red, Mephiston Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, and Troll Slayer Orange, we're going to do several things. We're going to do the weapons, the Purity Seal waxes, and the eyes. So everything is going to receive a layer of Corn Red. We're going to cover the major shell parts of the weapons, the chain fist pieces, and the eyes, and the Purity Seals with this. Then with Mephiston Red, we're basically going to cover everything. The Corn Red was just a base layer to as a foundation from all the black. And then once that's done, with Evil Sun Scarlet, we're going to apply it on the edges, the corners and edges of all the weapons and guns and stuff, and we're going to use it to cover the center, like the center of the eyes. We're painting like probably 80 to 90% of each of the eyes, and then we're also using this to paint the edges of the circles, as well as a dot in the center of the Purity Seal waxes. And then with Troll Slayer Orange, this color is only going to go onto the eyes, in the very center of each of the eyes. And maybe like a half crescent onto some of the Purity Seals. The circular ones, there's some different shaped ones. And now with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, I then apply this onto all the weapon cases, the shoulder pads, flesh, all the Purity Seals, and the loincloths. However, I shouldn't have done this now, I should have done this later because I'm going to come back to this step multiple times, so you can ignore this. This was just poor planning on my part. And now with Brass Scorpion and Liberator Gold, what we're going to do is we're going to paint all the metals with this. Now we're going to use Brass Scorpion as a base layer on all the logos, symbols, skulls, Aquillas, chest pieces, all over the model. And then once that is done, we're going to take a Liberator Gold and we're just going to coat pretty much like 80 to 90% of everything we painted before. For the Aquillas, we're going to overbrush / dry brush onto them. Make sure the brush is dry, so that way we can pick out the details. Just quick and simple. And now with Thunderhawk Blue, Baharoth Blue, and Ulthuan Grey, we're going to paint the power weapons, or mostly the lightning claws. And we start with a layer of Thunderhawk Blue. However, this was so quick and easy that I forgot to record it, so here's a picture of it. And then with an airbrush, because that's going to be the easiest to do, I'm going to very carefully apply Baharoth Blue to cover around half of the lightning claws and such. It's okay if there's a little bit of spillover into the surrounding area because the weapon's glowing. And then with Ulthuan Grey and a fine brush, I'm just going to apply it to the edges of the blades and the sides of the blades on the top. It's very small, very subtle, but you can notice it. And now, in an attempt to raise the standard of this commission, because I feel like I haven't been giving my best work, I'm going to do a bit more effort onto the power sword. So I taped the whole surrounding model, and I also taped up half and half of each of the sword sides. And so I'm going to start off with Baharoth Blue, coating the entire sword as a medium, and then I'm going to airbrush a dark color, which is Thunderhawk Blue, onto the bottom of each side. Then I'm going to do a 1-to-1 mix of Ulthuan and Baharoth Blue, and I'm going to apply it to the tip of the sword. Then, once it dries, I flip over the tapes, I swap them, and then this time the light color is going to be on the bottom and the dark color is going to be on the top. And then once it's removed, I'm going to take the mix of Baharoth and Ulthuan Gray, and I'm going to use it to edge the edges of the sword. And it comes out looking kind of nice, despite look like it has been slightly eaten by acid. And with Iron Hand Steel, Nuln Oil, and Iron Breaker, I actually don't use the Iron Breaker. I use the Iron Hand Steel and I clean up all the gun barrels and gun weapons, as well as there are these power cables that go into each of the arms and stuff. I paint these with a base layer of Iron Hand Steel, which seems to be like what Lead Belch is now. Go figure. And then, once that dries, I take Nuln Oil and apply it all over these new metal pieces. And then I go back with Iron Hand Steel and apply it on all the corners and edges and the solid chunks of the cable that are coming out of their arms. Simple, easy. And now with Liquitex modeling putty, I'm going to work on the bases. And if you notice, there are some giant holes in there. Ignore those. So this is a step I should have done at the very beginning, because it takes basically a whole day and night for it to fully dry and cure. The thing is though, is that in the process of painting the models, like I could have done this step because I want to apply their footprints into the bases and so that they snugly fit in there. The problem with that is, even though you organize it and stuff, when you're painting the models, you're going to be moving them around and stuff, and reorganizing and stuff, and so it's hard to keep a proper order throughout the entire painting process. So it is easier to keep it organized and keep them towards the end, but I don't know. It's faster to do this step early, but it's also kind of hard at times. Now with Elmer's glue and some sand, I then apply the Elmer's glue onto the bases after they've dried a whole night and I've already had the imprints of the exact soldiers onto them. And then I just apply the glue on and then just tap 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 them into the bowl of sand. And then I wait like an hour or two for them to fully dry and cure. And once that's done, I'm going to take Liquitex Matte Varnish, which is a terrible varnish because it isn't matte enough, it still shines. And so I use this as a sealer to seal in the sand. And now, after waiting a few more hours for, well, maybe just like an hour or so for the thing to dry, I take Mournfang Brown, Agrax Earthshade, and XV88, and I'm going to paint the bases. Mournfang Brown is the base layer, and once that dries with the help of a hairdryer, I then apply Agrax Earthshade all over. Now I don't use a hairdryer to speed that up because I need them to dry more naturally. The hairdryer will just cause some trouble. And then once that's done, I go back with Mournfang Brown and I dry brush all over the bases. And then once that's done, I then take XV88 and then I do another dry brush all over the bases. And done. And then I take super glue, and then I'm going to begin attaching the correct guy to his correct base. Now with Cadian Flesh Tone, Skeleton Horde Contrast, and Kislev Flesh, we're going to paint the flesh of 3 of the characters who don't have helmets. We're going to start off with a base layer of Cadian Flesh Tone all over the skin. And then when that dries, we're going to use Skeleton Horde Contrast straight from the bottle onto it. We're going to try to make sure it doesn't pull too heavily. Now this is a bit too dark for me, so then I go back with Cadian Flesh Tone and I basically paint 90 to 95% of the entire face with this. Only the deepest, darkest recesses and folds have the Skeleton Horde Contrast. But it's still too strong of a contrast in colors there. It's not smooth. So I go back with a watered down level like 1:1 with Skeleton Horde Contrast and water, and I pour it all over the face again, and this kind of smooths it out. Then I go back with the Cadian Flesh Tone, watered down a bit, and then I apply it to like 60 to 70% of the face. And then once that's done, I take a watered down Kislev Flesh and apply that to the most prominent sharp edges, like the raised cheekbones, the jawline, the folds of his face that come from his nose, tip of his nose, the top of his head, stuff like that, his eyebrows. And now with Steel Legion Drab, Agrax Earthshade, and Baneblade Brown, I should have waited till now to do this, to not waste paint. With Steel Legion Drab, we're going to paint the standard bear that also came with this, that I have not really shown. And then once that dries, we're going to apply Agrax Earthshade all over. And then once that's done, we're going to take a Steel Legion Drab. I'm going to paint like 90 to 95% of the entire standard. Only the deepest, darkest recesses will still have Agrax Earthshade. And then we're going to do a 1:1 mix of Steel Legion Drab and Baneblade Brown, and we're going to paint like 70 to 80% of the model. The most clear open areas, actually, you know what, maybe 80 to 90% of the model, or the banner is going to have this. And then finally we're going to do Baneblade Brown. We're going to paint like probably between 25 to 40% of the model or the banner with this. The edges, the most raised areas, the high raised areas of the folds, and the giant open areas on the back. And now with Ulthuan Grey and Pallid Witch Flesh, I'm going to apply this to the standard in the center. Ulthuan Grey is a really strong color, and I used Pallid Witch Flesh on the border banner and the outer edges of the big symbol in the center. And then once that's done, I'm going to take a transfer sheet decal and apply it into the center. And now with Skeleton Horde Contrast and Guilliman Flesh, I'm going to apply like some weathering onto the barrels of their guns. There's only a few. With Skeleton Horde Contrast to add the yellowing, and we'll also have the largest part in Guilliman Flesh towards the very edge of the barrels to add like a browning into it. Now with Doombull Brown and Agrax Earthshade, we're just going to apply this to the little kilts that some of the main characters in there have. Just Doombull Brown, then Agrax Earthshade on top. Something simple. It's good enough to fit in with everything and doesn't detract, but it's still good enough. And then with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, I apply this to the decals and to the banner that the guy is holding up. And now with Liquitex Gloss Varnish, one of the good varnishes they make, I'm just going to apply this to the power weapons. When the light hits it, it's going to, well, apart from add a shine, it's going to help like hide any negatives or bad lines with it. It's going to make the colors flow better. It's just going to make the whole appearance of the power weapons look better, especially the claws. And done. This took a little bit of time. I mean, 15 Terminators. They're relatively simple. It's just all the smaller details and stuff. And of course, removing and then re-adding texture took a bit. But if you notice, I haven't actually done the bases, the rims around the bases. The reason for that is quite simple. I'm actually not sure what I'm supposed to paint them because there's 15. I know that they can't be in one squad, but I don't know any of the special rules for Black Templars and stuff. So like in the future, I'm going to paint the bases, the rims of the bases. Just ignore that for right now. I'm just going to ask him like actually what to paint them all one color or like any differentiation or squads or stuff. I'll leave that to him. But for now, these are done. And yeah, so overall, as far as rating it goes, like I have improved them, so I was able to do something. I wasn't able to do that much because there were some parts where it looked like acid ate into it. In the banner, it was the most obvious. It looked like it was eaten into by some sort of acid or something, or I don't know how it turned out like that, but made them. It's much better than the previous one, but it's still held back a little bit. But I'm just gonna say average 5 out of 10. It could be better. In uniform, they look good as a tabletop unit. In uniform and with all their arrays of different colors and things, they look good. So I'm gonna say just a 5 out of 10, maybe a 6. But oh well, we move on. All right. Like the video if you like the video, comment if you want to comment, share if you want to share the video, and I will see you soon, hopefully with something cool.